British Prime Minister Theresa May became the first world leader to visit new U.S. President Donald Trump. May has called Trump's past remarks about women unacceptable, but she says she's ready to focus on the larger issues of trade and security. For his part, Mr. Trump has promised an even closer relationship between the two historic allies. VOA's European correspondent Luis Ramirez has our report from London.
The biggest rallies against President Trump's inauguration outside the United States have been led by feminists in Britain, still angry over campaign revelations of controversial remarks about women. But it is the future of trade in the post-Brexit era, terrorism, and the conflict with Syria that tops Theresa May's agenda with Trump.
I will be talking to Donald Trump about the issues that we share, about how we can build on this special relationship. It's the special relationship that also enables us to say when we do find things unacceptable.
May says she won't be afraid to challenge him.
I think the biggest statement that will be made about the role of women is the fact that I will be there as a female Prime Minister, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, directly talking to him about the interests that we share.
Some observers predict that could be an awkward moment between two people with very different personalities.
I would think for somebody of Theresa May's background, the way she comports herself, the way that she's lived her life, to confront Donald Trump is going to be moving into meeting somebody from a very different world. Or not quite a different planet, but certainly a different world.
And joining us now for more on this historic meeting, we welcome VOA White House correspondent Cindy Saine in Washington. And from our London bureau, we have VOA European correspondent Luis Ramirez, whose report you just heard. Luis, I'm going to start with you because that was your report. Let's talk about the build-up to this meeting. These are two world leaders, essentially, who could not be more different. I imagine from a political standpoint, it's pretty important for the British Prime Minister to be seen as an equal here, correct?
That's right, and being a good politician that she is, well, she was speaking to her audience here in Britain and saying that she is not afraid to push back on President Trump, given his past remarks on women. But she also made it rather clear that this is not going to be a priority for her to bring that up. She has much bigger things in mind, such as trade, security. In the wake of Brexit, there's a big incentive for her. She really needs to do this. Britain is going it alone without the European Union. America is very attractive in terms of setting up the new trade relationships that are necessary to pull Brexit off.
And Cindy, as Luis mentioned, it seems to be rather conciliatory so far, what we've heard from Theresa May. She did speak at the GOP retreat in Philadelphia on Thursday. How was she received by the GOP lawmakers there?
She was very warmly received, Mill. She got a lot of applause and standing ovations, and they, of course, especially loved her talking about the special relationship between the United States and Britain. She had a lot of very complimentary things to say about the United States, that it's always a thrill to visit, but especially now. And I think, as Luis said, you know, trade is going to be a central issue. And as President Trump now says, he wants to negotiate on a one-to-one, one-nation-to-one-nation basis. And I think this will be the first one up.
So she struck all the right chords there. Nothing controversial at all. Do you suspect that she might raise some of the more controversial issues when she gets into a face-to-face meeting with President Trump?
What I did hear from her was a little bit more of a plea. She said we don't need to get into unnecessary wars. We don't need to try to make other nations, try to shape them in our own image. But she did say we need to stand up for our core values and that alliances can be important. So especially I think NATO might be a key thing, with President Trump having said that NATO is obsolete because it wasn't founded to fight terrorism, and I don't think that the British Prime Minister would agree on that. So maybe he'll hear some views about why NATO is important.
Right. So, Luis, let me talk to you about Cindy's point here about NATO. These two are not exactly on the same page when it comes to this alliance. Are those differences likely to come up, or are we seeing a sort of a softening down of those differences?
I don't know about a softening down of those differences, but certainly we can expect Mrs. May to gently try to convince Mr. Trump that NATO remains important, that contrary to what he has said, it is not irrelevant. In fact, in her speech in Philadelphia, she said the cornerstone of the West defense established NATO is the cornerstone of the West defense, and that it was established on the bonds of a common tradition, the Anglo-Saxon tradition, one that she says the two nations should build on. And so what she's under a lot of pressure to do is to certainly get him to change that position, if that in fact is his position. Now, I'll mention that earlier this week I was at Parliament and having a conversation with a member of the House of Lords who said, listen, we are certainly surprised and a bit amused by the remarks, but not necessarily alarmed. All one has to do, he said, is read his book on deal-making from a couple of decades back, and you can see what that remark might have been about. Trump likes to throw things out there, maybe shake people up, and then see how much they're willing to negotiate. In this case, as Mrs. May said, getting the other members of NATO to pull their weight and pay their dues.
So the future of NATO is going to be a big issue there, Luis. What are you hearing from the other European leaders?
Well, they're watching very carefully. What reigns here or on the European continent is uncertainty of just how much he means. Now, of course, in his first week, leaders have watched very closely as he signs executive order after executive order, essentially making good on his promises, including the most controversial of his promises. And so NATO is next, just to see how he plans to handle it. And they're also paying attention to visits by the new Secretary of Defense, Mattis, who, going to Asia, going to other countries, is going to further explain just what the administration's policies are and how they will play out on the ground.
And Cindy, let me sort of go into another issue here. Another issue that these two leaders may have some differences on is the question of torture. What technically constitutes torture? How do these two leaders differ?
Well, President Trump did raise some eyebrows this week in an interview, saying that he does firmly believe that torture works. He said that Islamic State is cutting off people's heads and doing terrible things, and that the U.S. has had its hands tied, has not been on a level playing field. But he did say that he would defer to his Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of State. And they have clearly said, the CIA has said that, waterboarding is illegal. We're not going to do that. So it's interesting to see. And then I believe that the British Prime Minister has come under pressure at home to make clear that torture is illegal in the United States, in Britain, and according to international law.
So that's a point that she is likely to raise. Luis, I'm also interested in the policy differences, particularly on economic sanctions against Russia. Is that a topic that is likely to come up during the Friday face-to-face between May and Trump?
Absolutely. We have those sanctions expiring soon. We have a great deal of pressure building in Western Europe, including in Germany, certainly in Austria and in France, especially among energy companies who have been hurt by these sanctions. They want to get rid of them and get the gas flowing again, the oil flowing again from Russia, and continue with deals that were interrupted after those sanctions were imposed. And so this is a fine line that Mrs. May is walking now in her remarks before she left here, and once she was in the United States, is her advice to Mr. Trump is engage, but don't get too cozy. She quoted President Reagan on his famous line about trust but verify. She said that should be the right relationship with Russia.
And Cindy, I know as different as these two leaders are, they appear to be the product of the same sort of brand of nationalism that sort of catapulted Donald Trump into the White House, as well as May, who is really the product of the Brexit vote, correct? So I assume that they both have like similar domestic kinds of concerns, this Britain first or America first kind of sentiment. Would you agree?
Yes, I think that's right, Mill, and I think part of the Brexit vote was that people were concerned about the massive migration coming into Europe from Syria and from other countries, and that people were worried about that, and I think that contributed to Brexit passing against all expectations, as with Donald Trump winning here against all expectations.
And that may be one issue that both of them are likely to agree on. Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you, Luis Ramirez.